All of a sudden, he goes to his knees. His muscles were just trembling. My name is Larry Newman. I live in southwest Missouri, down in the corner by Oklahoma and Kansas. And back in, about 1969 or 70, my mother had a beauty shop in part of the house and had Reader's Digest. And I picked up a Reader's Digest and I read about this video that these two guys took in California of this bipedal animal. And that I'm an outdoor kid anyway, hunting, fishing, trapping, everything outdoors. And it got me interested. And then we fast forward here to the 2000s with the advent of the internet, and I run across this creature again. And so I started getting involved there. And in 2009, I read about a expedition in Missouri and signed up and went and met a lot of people from all across the United States, investigators. So I got interested. I had just retired from the sheriff's office as a detective and a crime scene investigator. And so they immediately asked me if I would be an investigator or be a FRO. And so that was the start. That's how I got my start in.
Well, it sounds like quite a background. So do you think that your investigative knowledge and skills have helped you in your Bigfoot research?
Oh, most definitely. As an investigator, you're taught to not make any preconceived ideas about what you're investigating. You take the evidence as it comes. So I started getting reports from people who had reported an encounter with something. And so I'm interviewing them. I first interviewed them by phone. And then if they're credible, I would go to their location and interview them in person. And then after the investigation, I would go out and try to follow up and find some physical evidence to support what they were saying.
What have you found in your years of investigating? Have there been any really interesting cases?
Yes, I think my first really interesting case was in southwest Missouri, in a town called Southwest City, which at the south edge of town is the corners of Missouri, Arkansas, and Oklahoma. But what had happened, these three guys had been fishing in Grand Lake in Oklahoma on Labor Day, and were coming home about 2 o'clock in the morning. And there's a little creek right on the north edge of town. Across from the bank, there's a tire shop. And as they were coming across that bridge, they see something in the big trash barrel that sits in front of the tire shop. They first thought it was a dog. Well, they got right up next to it, and it got out, and it tried to hide behind the barrels. But it's a 55-gallon barrel, if you're familiar with that. Both shoulders are sticking out on each side. So the driveway sits right beside the barrel, so they turn to go into the driveway at the tire shop, and this thing turns around and takes about 3 jumps on all fours and then stands straight up. It's walking away from them, and the lights of their pickup, when they pull in the driveway, they're about 4 to 6 feet behind this animal. It's full in the headlights, and it turns its body and head to glance back at them, and then takes a left and walks back behind the tire shop. The creek runs behind the tire shop. And so a friend of mine and fellow investigator, Ron Bowles, and I go down there to talk to these guys just a few days later. And it had rained in between the time of the report and the time we got down there the next weekend. And it had washed there's a hard chat driveway next to the tire shop where people park their vehicles. Whatever left the footprint left it deep enough in a hard, dry chat driveway that vehicles park on all the time. It had been deep enough that the rain had not completely washed the footprint away. So it was still there and visible. So after talking to the driver of the vehicle there at the tire shop, he met us at that location. One of the other three, one of the three, one of the other two guys refused to talk to us at all. Um, the third individual would talk to us, but we had to come to his residence and talk to him because he didn't want to be seen by the community. The community, they lived right there in town. They told the police. Police went over, took photographs of the footprint, which they a week later they said, "Well, we don't know what you're talking about." So the footprint pictures were gone, and so the community had kind of ridiculed and laughed at them. Um, so after all the interviews, Ron Bolts and I went back to the location on our own. And like I said, it had rained. And if you know anything about fescue grass, it will grow, it will jump considerably with a small shower. So it had grown a little bit next to the creek bed, but we did find a trackway. The footprints were 16 inches long, 6 inches wide, 5 toes, most definitely discernible, even with the grass growing up in front of them. So that was my first interview in which we found good, credible evidence. Like I said, I'm a investigator with the sheriff's office, past investigator. One of my primary jobs as an investigator was interviews and interrogations. And my main concern was to try to decide if this person is telling the truth or if they're telling a falsehood. I found these guys to be credible. And then when we backed it up with the evidence that we found, that was my first really good investigation that backed up with evidence and everything. So it just went on from there.
So has anyone else in that area that you know of seen a Bigfoot?
We talked to a number of residents down there, and some that would talk to us. And there is a long history of sightings in that area. Most people don't want to talk about it, but the few that did guided us to some locations down there where they're seen regularly. So yes, that was included in documenting their story.
What year did they see that?
That had to be back in 2012, 2013 that investigation happened.
Okay. But nothing ongoing as far as you know at this point since then that has been reported?
Nobody has reported it since then. I've done a lot of investigations in that general area, especially in northeast Oklahoma, about 10 miles to the west from that location, and got acquainted with the Cherokee people in that area. And this is a regular thing for them. They know about them. They've always known about them. They've always been there. They see them regularly. One family I talked to and had several years ongoing work with them. These things are in their backyard at night. The mom and dad of the clan, that he's a elder in the Cherokee Nation, and it took probably a year of trying to talk to him and his wife before they finally opened up to me. You have to gain their trust. Then we got a call from the daughter one day, and her dad and her mom had been sitting on the front porch in this remote area where they live. And they were sitting on the front porch in the middle of the day, just looking out over the pastures across the road. And he said all of a sudden, he said he saw this deer come running up a fence row. And he said right behind it was this gray Bigfoot. And it was running. He said it wasn't running on all fours, but it was running, and it would reach out and grab the ground with its front feet to propel it forward. The deer turned left into the fence row with the Bigfoot right behind it. And he said the next thing he heard was a deer bleeding like it was caught in a fence or caught. And then two big thumps on the ground, and Everything was quiet. So that was quite a interesting story. Went down there. We interviewed him, got it on camera when he told us about it. One thing I learned about the Cherokee people, and especially the elders, um, falsifying anything is just not in their nature. If they open up and they tell you something, it's going to be true. So with all the activity, I know over the years we know there was at least two gray ones there, an adult male and then a juvenile that was about 2.5 foot shorter than the big male, but it was gray also.
Gray's an unusual color. Have you run into that a lot?
Well, you hear about color variations on occasion. Most of them are a dark brown. Some of them are almost a black, shimmering. The Blue Man in Missouri was black. That was back in the 1850s. The description of that individual was that he was so black it was when the sun shone on the hair that it had kind of a green or blue tint to it. Like some animals you'll see with really black hair, it'll kind of shine blue or green. So there is color variations, and just like people, each individual is different. They're going to be a little bit different color, different facial, different, a little different all the way around.
Do you think regions make a difference in that, or have you noticed that?
I have not noticed that regions make a difference. I think, I'm 69 years old and I grew up on the farm and I know about genetics and I know how that works. And I think that some of these things could be genetic. Um, Different gene colors coming down through the heritage. So I think it could be possible that it would be a geographical differentiation, but not completely.
So, about how many cases have you been out and researched?
I've been out and researched all over Southwest Missouri, Southeast Kansas, Northeast Oklahoma, South Central Missouri, the Ozarks. We do a lot of research in the Ozarks. Um, so yes, I've been out quite a bit.
Is there any place that they seem to be more concentrated?
I think the Ozarks Plateau region that they call it, simply because of the national forest, the uh, absence of people, the scarcity of people, where they can stay remote and hit out and probably not see anybody for years. Um, the changes in human trends uh, to go out into the woods has been tremendous in the last 75 years since we become more urbanized and mechanized. Uh, People don't go out in the woods like they used to. So there's a lot of forested area, and some areas not so forested that the only time you're ever going to see a human in there is during deer season, which in Missouri is 10 days, and that's it. And there's a lot of area that sees nobody. So they can go for years undetected, unseen, and not have a human in their area.
You've probably heard about them dumpster diving, at campsites and various other places. Have you ever researched anything that was a little bit more in a public area?
Yes, the Cherokee Reservation in Northeast Oklahoma, the county, instead of having trash trucks come around and pick up your trash, the county places large dumpsters at some locations out in the county where people come and they bring their trash to the dumpster. I've got numerous reports in Northeast Oklahoma of people seeing these things in or about the dumpster when they pull up and they run off. One gentleman pulled up to the dumpster and two small, 3 foot tall uh, Bigfoot jumped out of the dumpster and ran off into the woods. But that's a common sight down there in that area.
Have you heard of any other places that have that, even outside of our four-state region here in Missouri, Oklahoma, Kansas, and Arkansas? Have you heard of that being a trend in other places?
I think wherever the opportunity is that they can scavenge for food, they're quite adept at that. And yes, if there's a location like that anywhere in their area, they're going to go there and do that. Yes.
Seems like food is the main thing that they're often out for, or try to constantly find. Thus, we have a lot of wildlife in this area in the national forest. I'm sure that that contributes to the population there, their ability to survive within those woods.
Yes, there's a lot of discussion as to whether they're herbivores or omnivores. They'd almost have to be omnivores. When you look at the size, when you take an animal that's 8 foot tall and weighing 6, 7, 800 pounds, it takes a lot of energy to keep that individual growing. And so, as far as the herbivore thing, I think that's a myth. It just doesn't make sense. They have to have the meat sources, the high energy meat sources, and you will hear a lot of reports. I've taken some reports from people who shot a deer. They crawled down out of their tree to go retrieve it. It's gone, and they can tell that something picked it up and carried it off. So there are parts of that anatomy of the deer, the liver, and some internal organs that are very high in protein and energy. And I think deer seems to be one of their primary food sources. They love fish. They will forage for freshwater mussels in the creeks. There's many stories of people seeing them do both of these things. I've had reports of fishermen going to a river to fish in the same place, and every time they go, something comes through the woods and is in the woods on the other side, slapping the ground and trying to scare them off, especially when they catch a fish and throw it up on the bank.
Exactly. And a lot of times you hear of people that actually see them carrying a deer, or even sometimes
Correct.
even a calf. A
Yes.
few times I've heard of that, but mostly deer. Vocals. Have you had any reports of what they sound like, or have you yourself seen or heard anything?
Oh, we've heard them. Yes, a number of times. Um, the first time that we heard them, my wife and I were in Tennessee, in the eastern mountains of Tennessee, at a Bigfoot conference. About 4:30 in the morning, both on Friday morning or Saturday morning and Sunday morning. We heard one scream from up on the hill, and I say scream. This was a deep, long Ohio howl type uh, verbalization. And like I said, I hunted, fished, and trapped all my life, and been out in the woods all my life. And I can tell you, there's no other animal in the wood that will sound like them. When you hear one, especially close up, there is no doubt about what this is. I don't, whether you see it or not, there is nothing out there that can make those vocalizations.
Have you heard the Sierra sounds? What do you think of those?
The Sierra sounds are interesting. The first time I heard the Sierra sounds was at when Dr. Scott gave a talk about those. This was at the 2012 Missouri Expedition. He came and brought the Sierra sounds and brought the translations that he had made from those. His background and his training as a crypto sound expert on antique sounds, unknown sounds, and vocalizations makes him probably the most credible scientist there is on vocalizations, on chatter, on a language. Um, Scott Nelson had researched the original recording. He flew to California, got his hands on the original recording so that he could study it. And there's no doubt that it is a language, and it is a language that is unable to be produced by any other known hominoid except for man.
Yeah, they're very interesting and very unique, very powerful sounds. And then a few other people have, of course, heard those in other locations besides just the Sierra Mountains. So it is really, really an interesting study. Have you heard anything like that in the areas that you've researched?
I have not recorded any chatter. 2 years ago in the Ozarks on an expedition, we were set up listening. Several of us with the expedition were in an area listening, and we heard a scream coming from a distance. And this scream continued, and I mapped it out on a map later, both the amount of time that it took that animal to cover that amount of territory, about 3 miles through thick woods, no trails, no roads, about 3 miles in a semicircle from our location, through the woods, up and down hills, hollers, creeks, up a bluff and around until it disappeared. A number of people were with me. We listened to it, and all of us, our first impression was this is a woman screaming. Very high pitched, very long screams, almost no breath in between for the continuous 30 minutes that we heard this thing. In the area we were in the trackway that it had to move, there's not an animal alive that is known to man that could do that. Now, I'm a foxhound person. I have hounds. They run 50, 75 miles in a night and bark all the time, but they don't have the lung capacity to stretch that bark or scream out for a significant amount of time, take an instantaneous inward breath and scream again for a continuous 30 minutes. So, never having heard that before, you have to eliminate all the possibilities, and there's no other possibilities.
That would be amazing. I mean, that's a remarkable span of time, and just the air that would be required to be stored in the lungs in order to produce that's just absolutely amazing.
Well, even if it was standing still, but this thing is traveling. It traveled a full 3 miles doing this all the time. It's not possible for any other animal that I'm aware of to do that.
No, and just their size alone, it's just absolutely remarkable. So no telling how large their lungs are. They travel at very high speeds. What can you tell me about that?
Well, I no one's ever measured their speed. All I can tell you is I know that I tracked that through the location that it moved on a map, measured that with the amount of time it took through heavy timber, brush, up and down hills, hollers. It would be amazing as to the speed. There were several people with us at the time, and the first impression that we all had was that it sounded like a woman who had lost her baby and was screaming, trying to find him. In the remote Ozarks of Missouri.
Yes. But speaking of babies, I just recently talked with someone, and they were talking about these, the structures, the potential structures, which we don't really know if Bigfoot creates those or not, but Those that are like the teepee thing, that they might be birthing areas. What are your thoughts on that?
You would have to talk to someone who's had more experience with those particular type of structures than I have. I have found structures that were not a natural structure. Um, they tend to be the ones that I have found do not tend to be much of what I would call a shelter as such. The sticks and the limbs and the things that are used are um, very loosely gathered. So it would not be a protection from the weather. Um, so I really don't. I someone that's got a lot more experience in stick structures are going to have to deal with that question.
For sure. So looking back at Bigfoot in the Ozarks and in this region, I know there are, I've interviewed a lot of people from Ohio, Kentucky, Tennessee, that kind of region up through there, and I've been all the way up, through Michigan and Florida. There seems to be a corridor there that's very strong. But we're building a lot more information now in these Ozarks area, that there's probably also an equal number of sightings that are starting to come forth in this region. What do you think?
I think that that's a very good possibility. My experience over the last 10 or 12 years in this area, I like to get out and just drive through the country, through the backwoods, through up and down roads, in locations in Southwest Missouri. And I love to, if I see someone out on the lawnmower or on the, or in the driveway or sitting in the chair on the porch, I'm liable to just to stop and go up, introduce myself, and visit with them. Um, and I use my investigators' experience in interview tactics, and I will visit with them about something that appears to be of interest. If they got a boat in the driveway, I'll talk to them about fishing or whatever they happen to be, and I've got knowledge of. We can talk about that, and then at some point when they're comfortable and that invisible wall has kind of broken down between us, then I will ease into the conversation about the Bigfoot. And it's interesting to see about half the people immediately pull back, draw back, don't want to talk about it. But then you get those people that say, "Oh yeah, they're here. We've seen them and we hear them all the time, and just matter of fact." And so you ease into that conversation. So there are a lot more out there than we know about. We talk about, right now with the BFRO, there's probably 75,000 reports on the BFRO site. But my experience in my part of the world has been that for every one person that's willing to talk about it, there's probably 25 to 30 that have had an encounter, have had a close-up sighting, who will not talk about it. They just don't want to talk about it. They don't want to be ridiculed. They don't want to believe what they saw. But I think the number of reported sightings is a small fraction of what actually is seen out there.
Few people that I've talked to have had pretty traumatic experiences just because it just doesn't fit in with what we think reality should be. We shouldn't be seeing this huge creature here in a wooded area because we don't believe that they exist sometimes. But some people have had really traumatic experience from that. How much do you think that people don't want to talk about it, but also are just kind of in denial that they even had the experience?
Oh, there's a considerable number. I had a report from a gentleman down in Oklahoma that had been taking his boys to school up a long driveway, and one stepped out in front of him. I mean, we're talking face to face, daylight. This is in front of him. I called him and talked to him and found out he was a minister. He was a preacher down there, and during our conversation, he went to crying because he could not conform what he had just seen with his two eyes into his religious beliefs. And it just didn't fit, and it shook him to his very core. So I think there's a lot of traumatic situations out there.
Yeah, I think that each person, of course, responds in a slightly different way. Some people are in denial and just want to go another direction, and then other people seem to be obsessed with going out and finding it again, maybe proving to themselves exactly what it was that they did see. Have you found that to be true also?
Yes, there's a number of people that once they have a sighting that they're just hooked. They want to see it again. They want to learn about it, and I think that's where we come in, people like you and me, and where we can come out and talk about this and help educate people who want to learn more. Um, they know it's there, even though science says it's not, because they've seen it, they've experienced it, and now they want to learn about it. So yes, there's a good percentage of the people that want to learn more once they've seen it.
I think it's a little trendy right now. There's a lot of information available about Bigfoot now that isn't like in a laughable state like perhaps maybe it once was. We've got some really good serious researchers like yourself out there in the field, and also there's just a more common voice, and the more people that talk about it, the more comfortable people feel about sharing their own experiences. Have
Correct.
you seen a change since you've gotten involved that it's more commonplace to talk about it?
Um, Maybe just slightly. It's still laughed at in most quarters. And when people make fun of me, you're chasing Bigfoot, and I said, okay, well, have you been to the woods? No. Have you seen one? No. Then how do you know they're not there? Um, that's a question I have for them. And so if they've not been in the woods and they've not seen one, how does that prove that they're not? Um, One gentleman that I was on the radio show with made the point that there's all of these reports out there. And if only one of these tens of thousands reports is true, then it's a live creature.
Well, I think you're right. I think that that's true, and there are many people, and I find it hard to believe that there are as many people as I alone have interviewed just in the last 9 months that have had very sincere experiences. They don't seem to be fabricating a huge amount of stuff that to go along with the experience. It seems very genuine. It seems very authentic to me. I'm sure some of them may not be, but most of them I think probably are. So just in my little short span of time, imagine all of the years that people have been experiencing these things. And yeah, we don't talk about them all that much because we don't have an good explanation, I guess, as to, why are we seeing something we don't believe that we can see. But I think it is a real experience that they're having. It's often difficult for people to really grasp how to even talk about it or who to talk about because, like you said, people laugh at it. Do you think that contributes highly to it as well, that people are going to laugh at them so they don't want to discuss it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And take, for example, I went to a piece of property. Um, I bought some sheep from some people, and I knew that within about 3 miles from their house, there'd been a sighting, and they lived out in the country, and they were back in the woods. And when we were finished, we were standing there, and I mentioned to them that I was an investigator, and I researched these things that were tall, covered with hair, and walked around on 2 feet in the woods. And he and her looked at each other, and I could tell by that look that there's something going on. And they said, well, we don't know because we don't let our kids outside after dark. And these were common country people, and that would have been an amazing situation for kids not to be able to go out after dark. And I said, well, why? And they said, well, the kids came running in one day, and they said they told us that there were monkeys in the woods out behind the house, and we don't have monkeys. And so they were that scared them, and continuing to talk to them, they they confirmed that what I knew. So there's tremendous amount of those people out there. There's a lot more people that know that there's something real, um, and they're scared to talk about it because they don't have an answer.
That's true. I totally believe that. People are scared to talk about it. They don't have an answer. We don't have good words to even describe what or who or how, something like this could exist. There are some stories out there, especially coming down through some of the Native American legends and myths on Bigfoot, that they take children and women. Have you had any discussions of that with the Cherokees that you have become friends with?
Um, they have not talked about that. The subject was kind of touched on a couple of times, but they don't talk about it. They don't. It's not really something that they know of in the few generations that are still alive. Um, some of the historians may be able to talk a little more about that, but I've not had the opportunity to talk to them about that particular subject. Um, we have a county in Missouri called Booger County. That's not the name of it, but that's what was called years ago. There's a lot of activity in that county. And when you go back in history and you look at don't go in the woods because the boogers will get you. That's, I think that refers to the old historical uh, knowledge that Sasquatch is out there, and that could happen. Now, there's thousands of people go missing in the woods in around the nation in North America every year. Some of them are found and some of them are not. We've got no justification and no data that indicates that that is what is happening. So
No,
who
there
knows?
isn't anything that shows that Bigfoot's actually killing people. I haven't spoken with anyone that had any kind of what they felt like was a danger when they did have an encounter. Um, it might have been frightening, but they didn't feel as if they were going to be harmed severely anyway.
Well, I have.
And tell me about those.
Okay. One person who you and I both know very well, he and I were in Tennessee and we're walking up the road, and everybody's watched the shows, and we do calls and we do whoops and howls, and then there's this real deep, long, gravelly, challenging type call that some people are able to do. And the man I was with, if we were walking side by side up a road, and he stopped, and some of the other people there got him to do what he called a challenge call. And so we started walking on up the road. Now this gentleman's 6'3", 6'4", and 250, 60 pounds, and very good shape. And he and I are walking together, and all of a sudden he goes to his knees. When you want to when one of the other investigators put their hand to his shoulder, his muscles were just trembling. And that's as close to being injured or a threat that I've ever been to. On his recorder that he wore on his hat the next day, you could hear this in just before it hit him. There's lots of speculation about the Sasquatch having infrasound, which is what whales and other big animals use to disable and confuse their prey. In the presentation that John Moreland made last week, we learned that because of the tongue structure and the vocal structure, based on the Sierra sounds and chatter that's been studied, it is very legitimately possible that physically these animals can produce infrasound, which would disable. But my friend just he had to stay on his knees for a while until he got himself back together. And Linda, I've been out on lots of expeditions and lots of night excursions with this man. And this man is never ready to quit. But when we got back to the truck, he wanted to go to camp. And if you ask Ron about that, he can tell you about that.
I will. Yeah, I definitely will. Is there anything else you want to add to this? It's been a good interview so far. Anything else you could think of?
Well, we sometimes come to the limit of our own particular expertise and knowledge that we've gained. I kind of at that I've established, you know, my expertise was in talking to people and determining if they're being truthful or not truthful. I found out there was another level that some people are truthful, some people are not truthful, and some people will tell you something that they fully believe, but the physical evidence just doesn't go along with. So they're telling you something not true, but they physically and emotionally believe it is true. So I've run into all three kinds. Surprisingly, there's not that many people trying to defraud us with false stories, as some people would like to think. I would say 60 to 70% of the reports that I investigate turn out to be accurate and truthful. So it's something that's out there. I think people like Dr. Moreland and people like Scott Nelson, who are scientists and experts in those fields. I think that Shane Carpenter and Randy Harrington are going to add a tremendous amount of data to what we already know about them, and I look forward to seeing what they come up with.
Well, I do too, and I've heard you're a pretty good caster of the prints out there. Tell us about Ron Bowles told me about your expertise in that area.
Yes, as an investigator with the sheriff's office and as a crime scene investigator, certified crime scene investigator, that's one of the things. Fingerprints and foot castings are two of the items that you have to be proficient in to be able to present your evidence in court and make it believable to a jury. And so we get particular with our cast. Casting takes some practice, but we've over time and years we've learned how to do it. Learned a few tricks of the trade. At the BFRO Missouri expeditions, I give a training course on casting, even taking fingerprints. Fingerprints are a less common item. You get back to camp and there's a handprint on your windshield or on the window of your car or on the car that wasn't there when you left camp. That is something that lends itself to a good possibility for lifting fingerprints. And the fingerprints that have been successfully lifted in those kinds of situations and submitted to labs, a normal police lab will come back and say this is no known human. It's kind of like the DNA that has been submitted over the years to testing. When science has not recognized its animal, the results always come back an unknown primate. But collecting that evidence it takes some practice. You find a good footprint. There's a lot of tricks to it. There is release agents that you can use so that the cast is not going to stick to the gravel or the ground underneath the print. We went to a wilderness area northwest of Branson a few years ago when a hunter had found a handprint, 4 knuckles and a thumb around the edge of a pond, and we cast that. And I have a pretty big hand, but this was over twice as big as my hand. So um, it's hard to talk about the specifics of casting when you until I can actually show you. But getting the right amount. If you practice, use dental stone, mix it with water until you get a consistency that's just slightly thinner than pancake mix. And then you pour it in from the heel and let it flow into the track, into the toes. Try to get it about an inch deep. I use a little bit of plastic netting, nylon netting, I put in it so that if it does break when I'm picking it up, at least it doesn't come apart. When you collect the evidence that you've just casted, when it's good and solid, take a shovel and stay about 6 inches away all the way around the track. Bring up 6 inches of dirt underneath. Put it in a paper bag, not plastic. Put it in a paper bag so that the moisture can dry out, and let it set for at least 48 hours. And then when you go to remove the dirt from the cast, use running water at a medium speed, not fast, but a medium speed, and let the water wash the dirt away. Don't use a brush, don't use a toothbrush, don't use anything because that might damage it. Now, Dr. Jeff Meldrum, who has collected thousands of casts, he is the university professor in Idaho. He has collected casts sent to him and himself that have the dermal ridges in the footprint. And the dermal ridges run opposite humans' ridges. Our dermal ridges run in, a spiral design, but typically across our foot all the way back from heel to toe. The dermal ridges he has collected on the Bigfoot prints, the dermal ridges run laterally, lengthwise, up and down the foot. So there's some differences there, and that all adds to the amount of research and information that we have. But that's the way you collect that track.
That sounds absolutely fascinating. I think that it's just one more level of research that with the more that's collected, the more evidence there will be, but also you can study the differences between them and the likenesses and maybe come up with some further answers.
Yes, absolutely.
Sounds good. Well, I'm going to go ahead and close out this interview. I really do appreciate you joining me today, and thank you very much.
Thank you. I appreciate it. It was good to see you at the Ozarks Mountain Bigfoot Conference, and we look forward to seeing you there again.